Imagine boarding a flight and paying extra, not for legroom or luggage, but to offset the very existence of your trip. That's the vision taking shape under the UN's CORSIA program, a plan aimed at making global aviation carbon neutral. And it will be one of the hot topics addressed in this year's annual UN climate conference this year held in Brazil. Commentators have noted the usual dose of hypocrisy that accompanies such meetings, from the expenditure of private jet fuel and this year going further, raising the rainforests to make way for the elite so they could discuss climate change. Tens of thousands of acres of protected Amazon rainforest were felled earlier this year to build a 4-lane highway to alleviate anticipated traffic congestion. Now, back to the aerial carbon tax. Behind the technical jargon is a simple idea. Tax every flight to fund green projects in developing nations. Under CORSIA, airlines must buy carbon credits to compensate for emissions above 2019 levels. The UN's International Civil Aviation Organization calls this a market solution. But its members, including China and Russia, will be exempt. That means U.S. airlines shoulder more costs than their competitors while the revenue flows into UN-approved green funds. The Biden-era agreement to keep the U.S. in CORSIA was never ratified by Congress, thank God. Now, as the U.S. heads into that meeting, COP30 in Brazil next week, well, climate diplomats are pushing to expand CORSIA into other sectors, including shipping, manufacturing, and energy. We've talked about some of that on the show, creating what some economists call a global offset economy. Supporters argue the system encourages sustainable aviation fuel and investment in renewable projects. Critics counter that it is a climate industrial complex designed to divert Western capital into bureaucratic pipelines that barely reduce emissions. In the end, ticket prices climb, but global CO2 output doesn't fall. Our next guest is a longtime environmental policy strategist and the co-founder of the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, CFACT, a nonprofit that challenges these radical climate policies with facts. Craig Rucker joins us now. Craig, thank you for joining us. Carbon credits, I feel like that was a term that we tossed away a long time ago, but it's not.
Well, thank you for having me on the program. Yes, carbon credits have been around for a long time in terms of what they've been talked about. Al Gore famously is the one who said it should be right to, save the planet and make a little money on the side. And essentially, this is allowing people to put out CO2, or companies, and having others offset that by doing things such as planting trees, or in the case of the developing world, just not developing. And you'll feel good about the fact that you're putting out more emissions because other people are paying the price for them. In essence, what we're seeing with what you just talked about, the CORSIA agreement, which is coming up at the COP meeting in Brazil, is just an attempt by the United Nations to try and find new ways of getting revenue. It's always been about the money, these climate meetings. They met last year in a place in Azerbaijan. I went to that one as well. They planned out this thing called the Baku to Balim, which is where it's being held in Brazil this year, roadmap. And this Baku to Balim roadmap envisions the UN getting, through these sorts of carbon schemes, somewhere around $1.3 trillion by the year 2035, to which developed nations will have to dole out some $300 billion annually as almost transfer payments. Of course, exempt from this, the big boys, China, Russia, and all the people that could, probably pony up quite a bit. It's going to fall on the shoulders of U.S. taxpayers and those in the West.
Now, the United States, under the Trump administration, is sending, as of this moment, no representatives to this event. There are going to be apparently a lot of talk in D.C. speculating about the lack of interest that the current Trump administration has in COP30. I was listening to Politico Playbook just this morning, and they were ruminating on this curious fact that the Trump administration refuses to participate in these kinds of conversations. From a business perspective, President Trump has been very clear. He doesn't see the return on investment. It's not effective, and it doesn't hold the right players' feet to the fire, if you even believe the science behind this. So what is your take on the Trump administration's handling of, or, absence of this meeting?
Well, I think it's just completely consistent with where position Trump has taken, even in his first term when he got us out of the Paris Accords. He's always been opposed to this. Rightly so. Little known fact, people wonder where these meetings originated from. They originated way back in the 90s when George H. Bush signed a global convention on climate change. And as a result of that convention, every year or 2 years or so, they hold these conference of the parties. They're called COP. The first one was COP1. We're up to COP30 right now. Little interesting fact. The U.S. has never ratified this in terms of the Paris Accord or even before it, the Kyoto Protocol. This has never been ratified. This is supposed to be something that's voluntary, and they keep trying to make it mandatory. Right. But nations have failed miserably. In fact, they're supposed to put in their nationally determined contributions to try and get down to something like net zero by the year 2050 and have a plan of doing that. Nations are supposed to come here and present them. Hundreds of nations out of the 195 that are attending here haven't even put them in, and they don't really have to do anything. Most of the developing world is on the receiving end of getting generous grants, and it is countries like the United States that are going to have to gut their economies while China and others don't do it. Trump is right to boycott this treaty. Besides, he has us at CFAC attending, and we'll be the unofficial U.S. delegation to the COP meeting.
We'd love to hear what they're actually talking about on the ground once you guys are down there. But in the meantime, I mean, one of the big problems with meetings and conferences like this, and even treaties like this, is the enforcement mechanism. So let's say we all sign up for this, but inevitably you have actors who are signing parties who do not follow the rules. In fact, they'll not meet the deadlines, they won't actually meet the emission standards or whatever it is. And then what do? It's a pressure campaign to basically shame and expose the violating parties because they didn't follow the rules. The enforcement mechanism has always been absurdly lacking in these kinds of meetings.
And you're correct. And one of the things they're trying to put across in this meeting, and something we should be concerned about, is having kind of a world climate court that can enforce the dictates of the UN on nations. Now, I know from other treaties, this goes back to the Montreal Protocol in the last century, the UN has always been talking about putting tariffs and embargoes against countries that don't conform to its treaty. They did that for the CFC treaty, and this is a type of mindset they have. Interestingly, when it came to putting on the carbon tax, it went back at them because Marco Rubio and the Trump administration said, you try and put a carbon tax on something like shipping, which they tried to do in April and they were about to ratify in August. And he said, we'll put embargoes on all those countries that do that. And we wound up succeeding. All those countries all of a sudden bowed out. The Middle East, many in the Caribbean didn't ratify it, and now it's put on the table to next year. So they don't like it when it's done to them to pull out of here, which I applaud the Trump administration for doing because it's a terrible idea. But I have no doubt that if you gave the UN bureaucrats their way here in Belém, Brazil, they will be talking about things that are punitive against those who don't conform to what they think ought to be done to save the planet.
What a useless body. But it would be they do have a lot of power in the sense that they run the policy in their respective countries. So we will be tuning in once you guys are down there on the ground. Craig, thank you very much for the time.
Well, thanks, Janelle. Always a pleasure.
Coming up, comedian Adam Yenser takes a spin on Headline Roulette. We'll be right back.